So my name is Lori Britt, and I am from James Madison University, but there I run an institute called the Institute for Constructive Advocacy and Dialogue. So what we do is we help communities have conversations like this, sometimes around problems, sometimes around things, listening to understand. And so I'm just a really curious person. I think that's why I'm good at this, because I love to hear people talk and I love stories. And so that's what I'm here to do. I often get called in to help people have conversations like this. So I'm just going to be moderating a conversation with our wonderful panelists who I'm going to let introduce themselves. And then we're going to open it up to questions from you all as well. Okay? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Levi, and I know a couple of you in here, but for those of you who don't know me, been here my whole life, born and raised in Shenandoah County. I'm a transgender man. I came out here in this community back in 2010. So for those of you who've been around here for any amount of time, you can probably imagine what that was like. So I'm really excited to be involved with PFLAG and to be able to reach out and connect with other people in the community and hopefully change things along the way for the better.
I'm Kathleen Murray, and I am director of Emmanuel Episcopal Church here in Woodstock in St. Andrews, Mount Jackson. I was called here in 2017. I was the first woman rector, and I was the first openly gay lesbian rector, which was quite a change, I think. And I just remember that one of the women who has since gone to God, when my call was first announced, there was some discussion, and she looked at them and said, well, you're all just going to have to get over it.
So I'm going to do a check here. Do you think it's okay if we don't use the mic? But please do speak up if you cannot hear, okay? But this way we can be just a little bit more organic. Just fizzle, is that okay if you want?
I've never
been accused if you would like to.
Just let me know if my voice doesn't carry well enough, so you
We've
can't
got
hear
it
me.
like right here. So I'm going to open with a question. So first of all, an amazingly powerful movie. And I don't know if Susie mentioned, that's a 14-year-old film. Folks, it always saddens me to think that's 14 years ago and are we still in the same place? So it's always good to contextualize things like that. But I want to note that the film was talking a lot about gender identity. But let's be honest, Christian churches haven't always been open to sexuality and different sexuality identities as well. So we're going to be talking about both of those things tonight. We're not just focusing on transgender or gender expression as well. So what I wanted to ask the panelists first was, tell me about your journey about discovering your gender and your sexuality. What was that like for you? What was your journey like, Levi?
Kind of like they described in the film. I think mine was similar in the fact that I always knew something was different. Just kind of feel different. People who don't feel outside of who don't feel at home in their bodies probably don't quite understand. Maybe if you can imagine if you woke up as the opposite sex one day, or the opposite, and you can kind of imagine how alien that might feel. That's how it was growing up. My brothers were allowed to do things that I wasn't. All the organizations that I wanted to join, I couldn't. And coming out as transgender really allowed me to become more of my authentic self. And while I identify as he, him, those are my pronouns. I identify as male. If I'm introducing myself or whatever, I just put male because that's how I feel. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that I am transgender, and that accounts for a lot of who I am, because I did spend the first 20 years of my life raised and socialized as female. So a lot of my mannerisms, a lot of my personality, reflects that. And I don't think that's necessarily bad, but it is different, from a cisgender man that
were born at birth. So there's confluence, things match up. So just, I'm one of those facilitators who always interrupts to make sure we all know the thing. So,
Thank you for that.
yep.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at with my journey. So I've been on hormones, I've gone through some surgery, been on hormones that have given me the features that you see. I have still a relatively high voice, but I have facial hair. I have a lot, if you pass me on the street, you're probably not going to know that I am transgender or anything like that. But it's allowed me to just be more comfortable in who I am.
Kathleen, what about your journey?
I would say I grew up in a family where we were all tomboys to some extent. We like to say we all learned to dribble a basketball before we learned to walk, because there were basketball courts right in our backyard from the high school. And it was probably when I was in my teens, I started to sense something was different, but I really struggled. High school, I didn't have time. I was just involved in too much. Kind of the same with college, but I knew by then something was different. And I really struggled a lot with depression. And I remember my senior year in college going to talk to one of, the school's quote, guidance counselor. It was a small women's Catholic college, and I basically came out, and she just said to me, and I'm Roman Catholic, she said she wasn't at all sure the church was right about it. Only later to find out many, many years later that she identified as a gay woman. She did not give me that information. She didn't need to give me that information. But it was certainly a struggle, and I was in my 30s before I had my first relationship, and went through lots of, I would say, heartache getting to that point. And actually, my wife is here tonight, and she is a deacon in the church. So. But I would say that there are lots of, in society still, there are lots of shoulds, and you should, and you should. And I will never forget, though, I worked in the city of Philadelphia for I would call her moderate, Democratic council person, skewed a little to the conservative side, but I remember saying to her that I was going to be leaving, I was going to be moving to California at the time, and she sat at her desk and she said to me, "What's it going to take to keep you here, including moving her here?" I was like, okay, I guess and that just takes me to a place to say where if somebody like her can get it, then we just have to talk a lot and really get people listening, because for her it was that one-on-one, knowing somebody, having somebody working for her was like, oh, okay, you're really not so different. So.
Great, thank you. We're gonna have lots more, but I want to, because we're here particularly talking about Christianity, I want to hear how faith has intersected with your journey. Were there times that you questioned your faith, or you questioned, the church questioned you, or what's your relationship now with your faith, with God, with Christianity?
For me, my relationship is complicated. I'll preface by saying that I was raised in the church. I started off in a Brethren church that I went to for the first part of my life. I switched to a Methodist church for a while, and I spent some time in a couple of different non-denominational churches. And, growing up in the Christian community, my experience was great. I didn't have any reason to feel any kind of way, because this was before I came out. So I didn't know what it was like to be, I don't know if I want to use the word ostracized, but to be othered, really, by a group of people. And then when I came out, of course, everybody has an opinion. And, I heard a lot of, most of the backlash I got were from, I'm going to use air quotes, Christians, because, I was church several years ago. I've kind of also gone back away, but it's been complicated because, it's very interesting because I have some of my biggest supporters are Christian, and then my biggest adversaries are also Christian, and they both use the same book to justify either their hate or their acceptance. And I've just kind of gone off on my own, where I prefer to be more spiritually led than faith led. I feel that's a more comfortable road for me because I don't have to deal with all the rules and I know that, people can heal, but sometimes I just don't know if there's any going back after a certain amount of things that you go through at the hands of a certain group. So.
Thanks. I know it's tough to share.
I can tell you there was a day in 1989 that I was in the choir of a Roman Catholic parish in suburban Philadelphia, and the priest gave a homily that said all you have to do is pray to change. And I got up and I walked out because I was 29 at that point, and I knew that I prayed, and that wasn't happening. I would say in a somewhat different vein, I had the support of some incredible women religious in my life, and I will never forget, and she just died a couple months ago, when I came out to Joanne, and Joanne wrapped me in a big hug, and she said, "So tell me something I didn't know." And, Levi's right, there are lots of, and I'm not exactly sure how I want to say this, but there are some Christians who preach a certain gospel of hate. But I would say that is not, people in this room don't represent that. There are many welcoming, affirming denominations within Christianity. I think everyone in that movie was an Episcopalian, but there's actually one, not that I use Wikipedia as a huge reference, but there's actually a great Wikipedia site about affirming denominations. The UCC Church, the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, the Evangelical Church, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, right? Not the Missouri Synod that was mentioned.
Can you tell I was raised Lutheran? I know the difference. I know
Exactly.
what we split. I know what we split.
Exactly. But I know it's also been a huge chasm within denominations. There's lots of research actually now showing people love the word Christ and what Christ represents. You put that suffix of IAN, of Christian, on it, and suddenly support goes down because Christian has become so maligned in so many ways. But that's my own journey in terms of support. And I mean, the first time I went to an Episcopal church, and I was invited there, and it was like welcoming, affirming. And Marty will remember, I was a few minutes late, as I want to be, and everybody kind of turned around and looked at me, and looked around and looked at her, because they figured, okay, this is how this person is coming. So I have to say, welcoming into the congregation is the biggest thing you can do for people.
That's actually was going to be one of the questions is, what can Christians or community members do to make all people, including people whose gender and sexuality expression is different, feel not only welcome, but truly included? Because there's this word tolerance. I'm not a big fan of the word. To me, it's a very cold word. It's like, I'll tolerate you, but you stay over here in your little corner. What does true inclusion look like or feel like from a community or a church community? What does that look like for people who have different gender and sexuality expression? It's a tough question.
the church, we could say, there are things we can do better sometimes, but not being the club, as it were, letting other people in. And there's a balance there, because I do remember the first time I went into church, and like the second week I went there, they said, oh, well, you'll be the chair of the outreach committee. And you'll do this. And it was great, but sometimes you don't want to pigeonhole people either. Or just because you have an openly gay person or a transgender person, well, you're going to be in trouble, not putting them into a,
Not adding a burden just because of your identity.
Exactly.
You must speak for
Exactly.
or outreach to everyone because of who you are. That's your job.
Right.
Isn't your job.
Correct.
It's all of our jobs.
So really getting to know people, I think it's relationship. And I think that's what they talked a lot about in that movie, is underlying this relationship.
What does true inclusion look like for you in the community? I mean, you grew up here. Do you feel truly included now that you're living as your authentic self?
I feel absolutely included as long as nobody knows I'm transgender. there's that piece. Honestly, what true inclusion really means is, from my perspective, for example, right now there is I'm sure everybody here watches the news to some degree. So there's a massive attack on LGBT rights, and they're especially going after transgender individuals right now. That's their thing right now. So inclusion really looks like speaking up. Like, don't be quiet when we're being murdered, preferably. Because we are being killed for who we are. We are having our health care taken away. I mean, I've had to have my wife doesn't like to think about these things, and I don't blame her. But unfortunately, when you are part of a marginalized community, you have to think about these things. But I had to have the conversation with my wife at what point do we move? What point, because Virginia, for example, is only one election away from turning into Florida. So if my healthcare, my ability to obtain healthcare as a transgender person goes away, at what point do I move? We have to move. We have a child, so it's not just about my safety. I mean, I'm good to stay and fight because that's who I am, but I can't do that with my child because she's gonna come first. So it's speaking up really, and just letting us know that you're there and you're not gonna be quiet while the laws are being passed. You're gonna speak up against them. The welcoming piece is nice, but when it stops there, it's how it's how the Holocaust happened. We accept the Jews, but we're not going to speak up about them being murdered. So it's really the same concept.
I want to open it for your questions. I have more, but I really want to know what you want to ask. And this is a space where we may not get it out of our mouths exactly perfectly, but that's okay. We're here, let's assume the best intent and just try and ask the questions that are really on your hearts to understand what you can do, what questions you have. So who's going to be brave out there? Great, excellent, thank you.
Levi, I may have missed at what point you had realized that you weren't identifying as a female. And I think with the movie, and I think with the communities, it's really hard for people to think that a young child can know something. So I was wondering when you might have felt that and how we can help people to understand that, yes, young people do understand their
Who they are.
Yeah, who they are.
Did everybody back hear the question?
So I'll start by saying, for me, I felt different, probably from age 3 to 5. I didn't have words for it. I didn't know what transgender was. I didn't even know that transgender was a thing until I was a older teenager. So when I found that word, I was like, this is me. we always, I say we collectively as a society, you know, when we see little boys and girls together, we'll joke about them, you know, they're hitting on a boy, you know, you're crushing on, the boy's crushing on you because he's being mean to you. But we automatically put boys and girls together. But same thing with sexuality. A lot of those little kids already know too. They know that they don't look at, like the little boy might know that he doesn't look at the little girl the way that everybody's telling him he probably should. Not to say that kids are inherently sexual, but they just know that something is different. Not always, you know, there's a lot of people that don't realize till later. But
Good question.
Thank you.
Other
I-
questions? Okay.
Levi, or both of you, did you feel comfortable answering that question about your journey to us?
I emailed it to them ahead of time, just so you know.
So
Because I didn't want, I wanted to make sure that the
I'm
questions were okay.
asking that because put the words into my mouth, all right? Help me out with, to me, I could never tell that you are a woman, that you were born a woman, okay? And so I'm thinking in my head that this is a secret. Do you feel comfortable answering that question to somebody that would ask in a church community?
Let me, if I get the question correctly, I will say, when I first wrote my spiritual autobiography, when I applied for the priesthood, my spiritual director read it, and she called me and she said, get your pen out, and you know, we started. And she said, this is lovely, but who is this person you're talking about?
Right.
So I would say that I have become very comfortable at this point, partly because I had to.
You had to.
I had to, but also it is a part about claiming who I am. About saying, yes, this is my journey, this is, so 15, 20 years ago, I may not have been so comfortable, but I think in identifying, and even for the person in my church community who, when it was announced my call, and they didn't announce it and say, we have called this, you know, lesbian rector, they said, we've called the Reverend so-and-so.
Yeah.
And of course
The check.
the chapel started. And to have that person say, you better get over it.
Yeah.
So yeah, to answer your question, I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But I can only speak from my experience.
And to me, all the people in that film were very comfortable and they felt so good about admitting it. And for me to realize that there are so many people who can't come out and talk about it, what is the conversation? What is the conversation that I would have with somebody? Is it just a beginning conversation? All right, are we just talking about the weather? Are we talking about that first level of conversation about, what did you do? Where are you from? But when do you feel comfortable in talking about it?
Can I take one more shot?
Yeah.
Yesterday, we got a letter in the mail, and it was a big envelope. And we saw the return address, and we thought, oh, we're getting a letter for the family reunion, which is every summer. Open the letter. Well, it's not about the family reunion at all. It's a letter from cousins to say, our child who was born and who we named such and such has transitioned. And sent out, and it's a full-page letter. And God love them. The bottom line was, we love and we support our son, transition from female to male. And basically, you're either with us or you're not. And I can't imagine imagine getting that letter from any family member 10 years ago. But it came out, and I was, because the family reunion is coming up, and they will be there. And this young man will have transitioned, and it's like, so I think, I'm gonna say, I don't think the conversation is ever too young to start. This person is like 16,
But I almost wonder if, Zelda, what you're asking is, sometimes it's like, what part of that person's identity do I have the right to claim
Yes.
by asking a question?
Yes.
Because that's also your private business.
Yes.
Who you are is also
It's
private.
your life.
That's
your story.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's your story.
But treating it that way, as if it's something we can't talk about, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please, I'm not saying, but claiming that it's your private is that tolerance thing.
Yeah.
You're okay to be you, but as long as you just keep it to yourself.
Don't you think a lot of it is personality?
Yeah, I think a lot is personality, how much people are. But one of the questions I was going to ask is, and music, I can't think of a better non-academic word, but what parts of your identity become most salient or most important for you to show others and share with others? Is it always your gender expression? Is it your sexuality? Or is it, your quirkiness, your, something that you do or you love? Because we don't, as cisgendered people, make our sexuality, we don't put it on display. Often we may with small markers, like my husband, my wife, things like that, pronouns. But what parts do you make available to other people? How, if somebody wanted to learn more without tokenizing you, without making you stand in for all transgender people, how would they start a conversation?
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Or would you rather they not? That's also an option.
It all depends, because what you see out of me is completely dependent on you. So, not all people don't see the same version of me, so how open I am with you is completely dependent on your energy, what words you, and I don't get hung up on, me personally, not speaking for everybody, but me personally, I don't get hung up on like the nuances. People screw up, people say the wrong thing. I care more about intent than I do about what actually comes out. I mean, that's just me, but, so it's really your energy. So I'm not open about being transgender. I mean, in my introduction to people, I don't come out and say I'm a transgender man. That's not what I do. Now, I will disclose it if I feel comfortable with you, just because it's who I am. So I'm not at all ashamed or afraid to admit it, but I'm also not going to make myself uncomfortable by admitting it to the wrong people either. So, there are little things that you can do that without even saying anything. So if I see you have a rainbow pin on, I know you're probably a safe person. Or not to, again, this is just me. Her view is probably a lot different than mine, but I'm probably going to be more likely to be reserved and hold off if you mention religion, because I'm just going to play it safe, and there's a very good possibility you are not going to accept somebody like me, so I'm not bringing it up. You're going to see a very, very shallow version of who I am.
Probably not so different.
So if you bring up God or you start talking about scripture, even though I know that is not all, I'm not willing to take that risk, because it is.
Outside of, obviously you have this long life as a female. So like if I were to meet you, I meet you today, if you didn't tell me, I wouldn't know. It doesn't feel important that I need to know that unless you wanted to talk about something that, would reveal that. And that doesn't matter to me. Does that matter to you that you would ultimately want to tell that, just so that when you're talking about maybe things that happened in your past it would come out? Or is that important for every single person to know?
It depends on the individual. So some people it matters, some people it doesn't. For me, it depends on my level or my relationship with the individual. So if it's somebody I'm going to talk to a lot, I struggle with not knowing, just because I just like to be because we're not allowed to play on high school baseball team. So just changing up little nuances like that, because sometimes it slips, and I like not always having to be on guard.
Right.
So for me personally, if I'm gonna have any kind of, anything more than a shallow relationship with somebody, I would prefer them to know.
Yeah.
In the back, and then we'll come up here.
How do you wish your family would have responded when you came out?
Gail already knows the answer to that question.
But I'm thinking there may be people in the audience who have family members and we want to know. We really want to do everything we can for you. How would you wish for us to respond when you come out?
I mean, the same way that anyone would want, Christianity is really big on talking about that unconditional love that God has for his children. We would really like to see the same thing from our parents, because we always hear that parents have this unconditional love, and really that love, I don't believe all parents have that, and I believe that unconditional love is more than just saying those words. There's action behind it. Love isn't a word, love is an action. So it's something that you have to show. And, you can show that by being supportive, by not telling your child they're going to hell. That's
Sorry, I'm not ready.
I joke about it, but, just being accepting, having those conversations, even if you're not pushing, making the comments that, because there's a lot of parents that are open and they're going to be accepting, but their kids don't know that. So make a point of just having the conversations about supporting people and loving people and about how open-minded you are. Just let them come to you, and they're going to feel more comfortable with having those conversations with you. Because I see that a lot, and that's the big thing. It's just that support, because even as you age, I mean, most of you could probably attest to this. Just because you get older doesn't make you not want your parents anymore. You still need. In fact, a lot of times as you get older, your relationship tends to grow with your parents, and I think, most of us just want the same thing.
My mother died at 61. She was very young. And in the last couple of days of her life, she started asking me about my then girlfriend, and who had just broken up with me, but my mother didn't know this. And my mother and I never had the conversation. And she was in and out of consciousness. And again, I was 34 at the time. We never had a conversation about me being gay. We never talked about it. And in one of her moments of clarity, she said to me, "Don't let anybody ever tell you it's not okay to love who you love." And I thought, you have to be dying and I have to be 34 before I hear this. My heart breaks when I hear about parents that don't, because in my mother's dying moments was when she could tell me those things. And that, I just wish that for all children, that at some point they can hear that. And I got to hear that, 5 days before she died, so.
I'll just share, right? Oh, go ahead.
I said, I want to add one more thing to that, and to say that how important it is, because while I'm also very outspoken about trans advocacy, I'm also very outspoken about suicide awareness. So a lot of kids don't make it to 34 to get a chance to hear that.
Exactly.
So
I almost did.
but there's a lot that don't. So you can't hold that back. If you're thinking it, if you're say it. If you're going to don't wait until it's too late.
I know I'm just the moderator, but I'll share, my youngest is transgender, but when they were very young, my then son came to me and said, "Mom, am I gay?" "I don't know, are you?" I said, "Why do you think so?" "Because I like fashion walks home from school one day, flies in the front door, and just turns to me and says, "Hi, Mom, I'm a woman." Goes upstairs. I'm like, okay, cool. So we just started as a family to have the conversations, but I will echo that the only thing in my mind was I want my kid alive. My kid's always been happy. I want my kid happy. I want my kid alive. And that's where we operated from minute one. That's the important part. I think some people don't understand how critical that is. Oh, you had a question too. I didn't want to skip over you. And then I'll come right back to you.
I was just thinking, I've been a PFLAG member for over 20 years, and I still misgender people by accident. Had a lovely trans woman living with me for several years. We did a lot of advocacy in Winchester area, and sometimes I'd be sitting at the table and I'd misgender her. They've been living in the same house for how many years? And recently I picked up a transgender woman who's new to the area, is coming to our church, and someone asked me to give her a ride, but nobody ever told me anything. And I saw her, and she's like 6 foot tall, and she has a very prominent Adam's apple. And I said, but her voice was really deep, and I sort of instantly knew just the way you know, and I kind of went into overdrive of telling her how accepting her church is. You know, us Unitarians, we like everybody and blah, 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 blah. And then I even found myself, like, she's been coming for a few months now, we have a new transgender person. I wanted to introduce them, and I'm like, you know, I don't want every Jew to introduce me to every other Jew. Thank you. Why do I do that? Why did I do that? But I just wanted them to have a community, but maybe I'm misgendering just by that action. And so, you know what I mean? I just wondered, where do you draw the line? And what do you do? What do you do? I mean, they were both shy, and they were both getting lots of attention from the congregation, but, you know, would you like to hear each other's journey? I think it's super different transitioning in your teens and your 20s than transitioning in your 40s and 50s. That's huge difference. You know, the hormonal changes don't, you know, you haven't had any hormone blockers, or you haven't had, I mean, there's so many things that are different, and this was also an age difference, so maybe that wasn't comfortable, you know. And then
What do you all think?
Yeah.
What should people do in that situation? You talked about intent, but
yeah,
can intent go too far?
Yeah, you want to be outed to every other lesbian and have them meet them in church, or would you prefer to just be you?
I prefer to just be me, as it were. I mean,
That's what I think.
yeah. But I can't speak to anyone else's experience. So.
That one's hard because that one varies individual to individual. I hear a lot of people say that they are very, they hate being, a lot of trans people hate being introduced to other trans people because they have nothing in common. You know, there's more to our lives than just being trans.
Right.
And so it really just, it varies.
It's so hard, yeah.
What about asking questions? Like, how can I best help you? Do you want to meet some other people in the congregation? I always ask first, how can I be of help? What would you like? What can I be a bridge to if need be?
I like that approach. You know,
Comes from my dialogue background. I'm always like, ask a question first. If we would spend our lives asking more questions than making statements, it's amazing what we would get. We would get more understanding. You had a question?
Yeah, so you each have had very different journeys, but you each had a similar journey in that you questioned who you were and who you were attracted to, or how you
authentic, it's just who you are. And when this community that you belong to, that's part of your identity, is telling you that you're wrong, that you're demon possessed, that you're going to hell, all of those things, you can imagine. If you just think about somebody telling some random life choice that you've had in your life, and your whole faith, maybe not everyone, but you have a lot of people that are very prominent in your life telling you that you don't fit in your faith anymore, and you're going to hell. That sends about kind of like an identity crisis, almost as much as your gender, your sexuality. And it did for me, and it was enough to almost send me over the top. So I was ready to kill myself when I first came out, because just could not handle it. To me, in my head, like at that time, I still fully believed in my head it was better. I would rather die and go to heaven than to continue living and go to hell. So that was my thought process. So yes, suicide prevention is very important to me, also for other reasons, but because I'm part of the trans community, I recognize how important it is in the queer community.
Just think of the number of messages that people see every day about how they're wrong. Faith communities, news about, you can't use this bathroom, you can't play sports, you can't do, all of those messages you take in. And so that
Double down with your family on top of it.
yes, and then if your family's on top of it, so that's why you have to have somebody close to you who helps become that kind of inoculation that helps say, no, those are not you. You are you. That's why that's so critical.
I'm just gonna say yes to all the above. Yeah. Serious.
Other questions? Questions, comments?
So, where did you find the psychological and medical support that you needed to do what you did in this community?
I did in this community. There wasn't anyone. There were friends that I had that were supportive in the community, but they weren't, I wouldn't say that they were super close to me to where, it's a lot different when you are, I was 19 years old. I found my support, given my age, I found my support online, mostly. So, finding community with other people who went through similar things, like YouTube. YouTube was a huge help for me. I did have people at Yale that were very supportive, from pretty much the beginning, and that made a difference. Just having some people in the community that supported me. There were others that were superficially supportive. I wasn't stupid. I worked at Walmart at the time. I basically publicly transitioned. Was the only one around here who had transitioned, so people didn't know my name, but they knew the girl who wanted to be a boy. So, I got a lot of those comments back, when I worked at Walmart. So finding support here was very hard, when I had all the messages and I had coworkers. I was fighting a bathroom battle at work because didn't want me to use the bathroom there. Online honestly was my biggest solace.
What do you think is the solution to the bathroom issue?
In my opinion, there isn't a bathroom issue, because at the end of the day, a predator is going to get in no matter what. Whether they have to dress up as something they don't identify as, or whether they don't. So, my philosophy is I will send my child into the bathroom with a trans woman before I'll ever send them with a Republican politician. That's my view. The transgender man, I'm not worried about them hurting my child. It's the
Please.
I'm a trans community organizer. This is the work that I do. The vast majority of research on sexual assault would show that it does not happen in public restrooms. It is most often someone that you know. Like that's most often. So that's not the whole like basis of the paradigm is false. On top
Oh,
of
stranger danger is.
right, yeah, it's not. That's not. It's familial danger. On top of which, in my experience, most trans people are way more terrified of the other people in the restroom than vice versa, because we get beat up in restrooms, sexually assaulted. That's more common than the inverse statistic.
Echoing that. Because I am terrified of that.
Bathroom is only an issue in the United States. If you go to another country, there's a long line of toilets, and there's a long line of seats, and everybody goes in and closes the door.
I might be dating myself, but did any of you ever watch the show Ally McBeal? I might have been the only human that watched it, but they had completely gender neutral restrooms. Everybody always went in the same, that's where they all, like, why have we never gone to this?
Yeah, if you go to Europe,
Yeah,
the bathrooms are like that.
It's a biological function, nobody likes standing in front of anybody else.
A lot of them don't have some are holes in the ground.
Why, no matter who you are.
Any other questions, comments? I think some of the smaller conversations are always just as important, so I will leave time for some mingling afterwards too and eating some more. I want to say thank you to Kathleen and Levi for letting me.